Pokemon. Gotta catch 'em all. Or do you? Today's video is quite clearly about Pokemon, and boy do I love it, though I'm still not over what the internet did to my favorite water dog. Fire Red was one of the first video games I ever played, and you know how when you first started playing Pokemon, you just kinda got the strong guy and gave it the strong moves? Your team probably looked something like this. But after you play enough, you might start putting together actual teams, and maybe start using something other than damaging moves, like stat raising moves. For example, Swords Dance. By using that, your physical attacks will do a lot more damage. How much more? Well, let's see. My Pokemon has an attack stat of, and this move does this much. Oh, and he's got this much defense, so basically it makes no sense. I mean, obviously bigger number means bigger damage, but how much bigger? What changes when a Pokemon goes from 60 attack to 70? How does defense work into all this? Find out next time. Okay, but seriously, this is how it is with RPGs. These numbers mean nothing to the player. I mean, you get by just fine with bigger number better, so it's not a huge problem. But for me, I would feel just a little better knowing how exactly this system works. If you want to keep it simple, it's this. This is the equation for how much damage an attack does. So if that's all you care about, then video done. Pack it up, boys. However, if you want to know what the rest of this video is about, then I'll reveal a little something to you. The formula keeps going. This is long, so long that it extends past the text space of the Bulbapedia page on my laptop. So how about we break it down? Okay, sorry. There is one thing I should explain to those who have lives. What are the actual stats of Pokemon? First is attack, which is the physical attack that applies to damaging moves with this symbol. Then special attack, which works just like attack but for moves with this one. Then the counterparts to the attack stats, defense and special defense. And it should be pretty clear what those do. Then the other two stats, health and speed, which I'm largely going to ignore in this video as they're pretty simple. You can clearly see how much health a Pokemon has, and then speed just determines who goes first by whichever Pokemon has the higher number. Alright, this time, for real, let's start. As shown earlier, this part is the real meat and potatoes of it all. First, you take the level of the attacking Pokemon, multiply it by 2, and then divide by 5, and add 2. Why that's how the equation works? I'm not sure, but that's just how it is. Then, multiply by the number you just got by the power of the move you're using. Next, depending on if you're using a special or physical move, you'll multiply that number by your Pokemon's correlating attack stat divided by the opponent's correlating defense stat. That's the top half done. You still with me? That was the hard part though. Now just divide the top by 50 and add 2. Voila! You've found the damage of your attack! Congrats! If only it were that simple. That was just the base calculation, and now comes all the additional factors that can apply to any single attack. I'll take it one at a time and explain how each one works, and then we'll come back around and wrap it all up with an example. Starting off is the number of targets. This applies to moves that hit multiple targets like Earthquake. An example scenario would be if you're in a double battle and you use Earthquake, the move would do 25% less damage than it would if you were attacking only a single target. Moving on, I'm going to ignore this one. It's just an ability that a single Pokemon has in which it attacks twice in one turn with the same move, so it's not really relevant, but simply put, the second attack does less than the first. Next is weather. This applies if it's sunny or raining and affects fire and water moves respectively. In the respective weather conditions, moves of the corresponding type will do 1.5 times the damage and half the damage for the opposite type. So in the rain, water moves do more damage and fire moves do less, and vice versa for sunlight. There's also snow, previously hail, and the sandstorm weather conditions, and these influence defenses. Snow applies to ice types, boosting their defense by 50%, and sand will do damage to any non-rock, ground, or steel types, and additionally boost the special defense of rock types. Next on the chopping block is something that doesn't matter. Glaive Rush is a move used by this guy, and basically makes it so that the turn after it's used, any attacks against the user will do double damage. I'm not really sure why this move and Parental Bond are specifically listed in the calculation, but they are. Oh, what's that? Ooh, it's a critical hit, which makes any move do 1.5 times the damage. Each attack in modern Pokemon games has about a 4% chance of being a critical hit without any additional modifiers. Critical hits also ignore things like stat buffs, so if your Pokemon had its attack dropped by a move like Growl, or if the opponent raised their defense, then a crit would make it so that your attack not only does 1.5 times damage, but it's also treated as though the stats hadn't changed at all. This, however, does not apply to the inverse though. If your attack was raised or the opponent's defense was lowered, those still apply even when critical hits are landed. Number 6. Randomness. This is probably the weirdest part of damage calculation, so just bear with me. Let's say you attack. This move can either do a maximum of 100% of the damage you expect it to, or it can do a minimum of 85% or any number between that. This is random and is commonly referred to as damage rolls. Why does this exist? No idea. Literally every move you ever use has a random amount of damage it will do, which kind of sucks in a game that's already very random and has a very big competitive scene, but that's their problem. I just play the funny monster game for children. Stab. No, not the kind that the British do to mug people. Stab, or same type attack bonus, is a mechanic that makes it so that when a Pokemon uses a move that matches one of their types, it will do 1.5 times damage. For example, if a fire type uses a fire move, it'll have that bonus damage added to the attack. This honestly feels like an integral part of Pokemon, but without watching YouTube videos, I'm not sure I would have ever learned this. I'm sure it's somewhere in the games, but I can't say I've ever heard any mention of it. This next part, though, is explained in the game, and is the Pokemon thing. I'm sure everyone knows how this works, but maybe you don't know exactly how much more super effective moves do, or how much less not very effective moves do. If one type is weak to a move, then damage is multiplied by 2. If both types are weak, it becomes 4 times the damage. Inversely, if one type resists, it does half, and if both resist, it becomes a quarter. Pretty simple. There is an interesting interaction though with two moves, namely Forest Curse and Trick or Treat, both introduced in Generation 6, X and Y, which add a type to a Pokemon, which makes it possible for super effective moves to do 8 times damage, or not very effective moves to do 1/8 of the damage. Here we have the only part of calculation that affects physical moves. Burn is a status effect that not only does damage at the end of every turn, but also halves the attack of a physical move. It's like super annoying, but at least it's not sleep. Other is basically everything else, so moves like Pursuit that do more damage if the opponent switches out, moves like Electro Ball, Gyro Ball, or Body Press that have damage based off of stats that aren't attack, abilities like Steelworker that boost the damage of moves, Helping Hand boost, held items, and a whole bunch of other stuff that really isn't super important. If you really want to know, then study up. Go to Bulbapedia or YouTube and be a nerd like I am. Finally, we have gimmicks, which are overly complicated and not relevant. Basically, if you use a Z move from Generation 7 and the opponent uses Protect, then it does 1/4 damage. In Generation 9, terastallizing into a type your Pokemon already has turns your 1.5 times stab boost into a 2 times boost. And then in the case of Terra Raid battles, when the raid boss's shield is active, it is 0.2 times if the player's Pokemon is not terastallized, or 3.5 times if it is, but the used move is not of its Terra type, 0.75 if it is, and the used move is of its Terra type. The result is subject to standard rounding up at 0.5. Also, as a side note, when a Pokemon gets a stat raise or drop from a move, item, or ability, each stage changes that stat by 50%. So if you get your attack lowered by one stage, you do 50% less damage. This maxes out at 6 stages, so a 300% increase or decrease in the stat. Bada bing, bada boom! And just like that, we're done. So let's put some of this to the test in an example. In a double battle, a Trevenant uses Forest Curse on a level 50 Scizor. Then, a level 50 Torkoal with Drought uses Heat Wave on the Scizor and its partner. How much will it do to Scizor? So we run this first part of the equation, which is just so complicated for why? Then multiply by 0.75 because it's a double battle, multiply by 1.5 because Torkoal set up the sun and is using a fire type move, another 1.5 for a crit, just because. Then let's say, for the sake of seeing how much damage we can do, the damage roll gives us the max, so multiply by 1, another 1.5 multiplier for stab, and because Scizor was hit by Forest Curse, it has 3 types weak to fire, so the damage is multiplied by 8. This Scizor has 145 HP. How much do you think this one attack will do? Torkoal's Heat Wave will do approximately 1,239 points of damage, which could kill Scizor 8 times over. Okay, well, to be honest, I'm pretty sure I messed up somewhere because I had to plug this into an actual calculator because the Pokemon damage calculators, crazily enough, didn't have a setting to have a Pokemon affected by the incredibly niche move Forest Curse. Ridiculous! But even if it was wrong, Scizor would most certainly die. Hey, welcome to the end of the video. Hopefully you understand a little more about Pokemon mechanics. I wasn't exactly sure how in-depth I wanted this video to be because there are so many interactions with items, abilities, and super weird stuff that's really niche and scenario specific. Also, as someone who watches a whole bunch of Pokemon content, I already knew about this stuff, so I figured that if you knew any of this information, you probably knew all of it, or at least most of it. And if you didn't know it, then I didn't want to get overly complex. Also, this was all based off of how things work in modern Pokemon because things have changed over the years, and I'm sure will keep changing over time. Pokemon is surprisingly complex when you go below the surface level, and I think that's what keeps it interesting to me and many others. Well, it's been real, it's been fun, it's been real fun. Remember to leave a like and subscribe. Later!